Hey listeners, we're nearing the end of our 15th anniversary fundraising campaign, and we need your help to meet our goal. This campaign offers you a chance to win a unique food and music experience in one of the most exciting cities in America. Here's how it works. Donate to HRN and you'll be entered to win dinner for two and 2 tickets to a concert in one of 8 amazing cities: New York, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, Nashville, Las Vegas, Charleston, Ardmore, Pennsylvania, and Asheville. All donations support our work educating food system storytellers. And when you donate, you can choose one of those cities and you'll be entered to win dinner and 2 tickets to a show. So help us reach our goal and enter to win dinner and a show in the city of your choice. Check out heritageradionetwork.org/15 to donate and enter to win today. That's heritageradionetwork.org/15. Thank you.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network. Since 2009, Heritage Radio Network podcasts have been exploring the wide world of food, beverage, and agriculture. Learn more at heritageradionetwork.org. Welcome to the Grape Nation, your weekly wine journey. Our guest is Aaron Ayscough. We'll talk to Aaron about his new book, The World of Natural Wine, and more. We'll taste something. I don't know what we're going to taste. Jorge may walk something over to talk about, which kind of reflects the book and the natural wine movement and the vibe. I'm your host, Sam Ben-Ruby. Stay with us for the Grape Nation on the Heritage Radio Network. We bring wine to the people. Born in Pennsylvania, but now a British American living in France, Aaron Ayscough made his way out to L.A. at the young age of 23, and even to his surprise, became a prominent Italian wine buyer for famed pizza chef Nancy Silverton. Looking for an escape a few years later, Aaron headed to Paris, working in fashion and organically, no pun intended, made his way into the thriving natural wine scene. He hung with all the Paris natural wine luminaries before moving to Beaujolais, where he got a sense of the real natural wine culture, and started his wine writing and winemaking. In 2015, he launched his wine blog, appropriately named Not Drinking Poison, and he also sommelier at some of Paris's best wine restaurants. Aaron's perseverance and passion for natural wine has led him to write The World of Natural Wine, what it is, who makes it, and why it matters. Welcome to the Grape Nation, Aaron. I'm usually pretty accurate on my intros. Did I hit something wrong?
Yeah, I started the Not Drinking Poison in 2010.
2010?
Yeah, rather than 2015.
What did I say?
2015.
Oh, yeah. All right. So, and I knew that because it's been over a decade, and we're going to talk about that too.
It became more interesting from 2015, probably.
Yeah, and it's more legit when it's older. All right, so we're talking to Aaron at Frenchette restaurant in Tribeca. We are in the restaurant during the end of lunch service, so you hear some fun ambient noise. And we're sitting here with Aaron right before one of his book signings. He's in the U.S. and he's on a pretty intensive, tour or a bunch of stops to promote the book, and we'll talk about that. So, Aaron, I want to start this way. And I said this to you offline. A lot of people know who you are because they follow you on the blog, anxious for the book, know you in the business. But there's a lot of people who don't. So if you would indulge me and take a few minutes and talk to me about your journey in life and wine that got you to why we're sitting here today, which is writing, this great book. And I think I led on to some stuff in the intro, so.
Yeah, I think you just about covered it.
That's it. We can go home.
Exactly.
See you later.
I grew up with no wine culture whatsoever.
Where in Pennsylvania?
Around the Westchester area.
So not far from Philly.
No,
not in
pretty,
Philly,
pretty far
but
out.
not.
Not in
that's
Philly.
true.
And then I went to school in Boston, to college, and so
Emerson.
Yeah,
My
Emerson.
wife's alma mater.
Yeah, and to make money, I began waiting tables, and the best way to get better tips is to know how to sell wine a little bit. So that's kind of how I got into wine, was waiting tables.
So, just hospitality at the basic level interested you. You're like, let me embed myself a little more.
No, it was just a way to make money. It was the best way to make money while in college. And I think there's
Right.
a glamour associated at that age with working in a fine restaurant that you can't afford. And so I did that for a few years in Boston, and then I left Boston to go to Los Angeles. I tried to graduate early because I was quite sick of Boston. And I feigned an interest in film in order to be part of the LA program that Emerson had. And then I moved to LA, and then I graduated college and immediately needed a job, obviously, because I had no money whatsoever. And that's when I wound up at Mozza, because I was just literally handing out resumes left and right. I didn't really fit the profile of a good bartender or waiter in Los Angeles, because if you're sort of a skinny, bookish guy, there's like a lot of like handsome, extremely professionally charming men and women ahead of you in line for all these jobs. Because
Hey, don't sell yourself short. You're skinny, you're bookish, but you're handsome.
Thanks very much.
I would tell you
They
otherwise.
tell me I've got a very good face for podcasts.
You do have a good podcast face, which is why I'm a podcaster. Thank you. Did you know, was Mozza like, did they hit it hard by that point? Were they famous? Was Nancy sort of a celebrity then, or that was the early stages?
It was an absolute roaring instant success, that restaurant.
Really?
There was a line out the door for 12 hours of the day from noon till midnight. And for me, that was a trial by fire in terms of, because a month after I began working there as a server, the guy who became my first mentor in wine, David Rosoff, who still is in the LA restaurant scene and wine scene, a wonderful guy. He offered to promote me to manager and to teach me how to be a wine buyer.
Was that done because you really were, involved and interested and I want to know more? Or he just thought you were a good guy and he needed somebody?
I think he needed somebody.
Okay.
I think there was a major staffing crisis at that time, and
So was there
the bar
any
was low.
Was there any slant then towards natural wines, or was just wine generally Italian? I would guess.
Exactly, it was
Yeah.
a small Italian wine list, just 50 selections at that time, and I quickly realized doing the wine list that nobody was there for the wine. They were there for these cult pizzas. That had really become this sort of media phenomenon in Los Angeles at the time. And so I realized that I could just do absolutely whatever I pleased with the wine list, and people would just lap it right up. So the first thing I did was banish any grape variety that wasn't native Italian. So there was no Cabernet, no Merlot, no Pinot Noir, nothing.
So you made it a pure Italian wine list.
Well, of course, just pure Italian. But then, of course, then I started bringing everything to organics, or as much as possible, as it was possible at the time, because there's
Wait,
still.
so talk to me about that. You started bringing everything to organics while you were at Mozza because, what made you realize it made sense then?
Seemed like the hip thing to do. I don't know.
Okay.
I had very only a dim awareness of
it was
this stuff at that
sort
time.
of
This was in 2006. At that time.
enlightenment.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So you do that for what, a few
Well,
years?
but I think I was at that time. In the wine world, like 2006 to 2008, it was still an era where biodynamics got a lot of buzz and controversy as being somehow this sort of witchy version of organics, and it seemed so radical. And I think there's still something I try to address in the early chapters of my book is that there's still a lot of confusion in the marketplace between biodynamics and natural wine.
All right, so we're going to talk about that because I think that's
not the same story.
It may not be the number one issue, but it's an issue that I think a lot of people don't understand or grapple with. So let's just stay with the timeline. So you do Mozza, you kind of get to do some fun stuff because nobody's, busting your balls or whatever. But then what happens? After a few years, it sounds like
I was in line for a big promotion there because I'd moved over to the Osteria Mozza, which we'd opened by then, and then the guy I was working for there, a great sommelier called Jared Heber, he left, and I was kind of like the next in line to be
Like the head wine guy?
Yeah, the head wine guy at this much larger, more impressive wine list. And I thought, well, I guess maybe this wine thing could turn into a career for me. It's, if I'm like, I was 25 at the time, I was like, man, maybe I'm going to have like a really cool career in wine. And then some decision was made higher up after David had already offered me the job. He was going to get back to me with a salary offer. And I think at that time, the Batali Bastianich group was, heavily involved in the restaurant. I believe Bastianich still is. Batali not for obvious reasons.
Right.
And I think someone on their end kind of overruled David, and David ended up having to rescind the job offer. And I was like, buddy, come on, man, I can't stay. You can't do that to somebody. And
you know what? In the end, that may have been...
That was the impetus for me to get out of Los Angeles.
So that happens, and I totally get how you feel and screwed.
Yeah.
But how long and why, are you bolting out and going to Paris? I mean, how long does it take to figure out what the next step is?
That was always I think
looming.
Well, it was more just because I knew I had, at the time it was pre-Brexit, and I had a British passport thanks to my stepfather, who is English. He's from Northern England, and my primary interest in this whole wine thing is actually the writing. I like writing, and wine keeps me writing. And as a writer, I always had a chip on my shoulder about only speaking one language, because all my favorite writers, all of the great, impressive, imposing classics from Beckett and Nabokov and all these things.
Wait, so
they all spoke many languages.
To the writing point,
yeah.
Obviously, when you started working wine at Pizzeria Mazza, and then you decide to go to Paris, were you writing? Was writing an aspiration? When you got there, that was the time to start it? I mean, is that... Because you corrected me, you started in 2010, not 2015.
Yeah.
This is a little before that, right? Or right around?
Basically, as soon as I got to Paris... that was why I wanted to move to Paris, was basically because I figured that would be how I would learn French. And so at least I'd have a second language. And I had met some fashion designers, some very kind fashion designers and fashion photographers in Los Angeles, who at my going away party from LA, I hadn't quite figured out what the hell I was doing. And they were like, oh, you want to move to Paris? Well, we've got some friends there at this fashion company, and sometimes they hire that way. So maybe we can find you a job.
So the initial hookup was through some contacts and friends?
Yeah, some regulars in my restaurant who became friends.
And it pushed you into fashion, not wine necessarily.
Exactly, yeah.
So tell me what you were doing and how long.
So it turned out to be, it was an internship for a Japanese fashion company in Paris, and I ended up working there for 6 years. And it was when I discovered the French 35-hour work week that I realized that I might as well have a second career as a wine writer.
So at the beginning of the fashion thing, you weren't doing much wine.
No, not at all. I moved to Paris really to leave the wine industry.
Did you enjoy that? I mean, did you go to bed happy and wake up anxious to go to work? Did you mind the scene or the vibe in fashion?
It was all quite alien to me.
It was? For like the whole 6 years?
Well, no. I mean, I think I made some wonderful friends through that scene as well, and people that I'm still great friends with. Even last night at we did a little book release event at Night Moves, the nightclub next to the Four Horsemen in Brooklyn.
Justin Chernow and Robert Dentis.
Exactly, and Amanda McMillan, the general manager. She's a friend that I made back in the fashion scene as well, because she was a friend of my colleague Daphne, who was the head of press for New York at the time, and so we met in completely different context. So it was really like a reunion last night. It was really wonderful.
Very cool. So what happens? You approach about 6 years, and towards the end, you're starting to write. You're starting to pursue your passion of wine writing.
No, I mean, I began the blog, the Not Drinking Poison thing, because now I don't even know what to call it, because now it's on Substack. I moved it from Blogger then to WordPress, and now it is on Substack. It's still called Not Drinking Poison, but even like you're supposed to call it a newsletter, but I guess it's basically like a blog. It's I don't know.
In all my time spent on it and reading it and seeing an older iteration and the newer one, the Substack, I couldn't figure out exactly what it was. I mean, the content's amazing and I get what you're doing, but I was trying to put the format into some kind of box, and maybe it didn't matter.
Even one of the main guys at Substack, we were asking him, like, about the terminology. I was at one point like, do you call this a newsletter? Because when you say newsletter, people think you have to kind of be there, signed up to get it. But if it's on Substack, then you can just visit the site and it's all archived there. It's like a blog. And he's like, well, it's true, newsletter is kind of a misnomer. I just try to call them Substacks now. So I think he's trying to, become like a Xerox or Kleenex or a,
And that
kind of
works
thing.
for you, right? I mean, you don't need any...
So honestly, I really like Substack. I think it's been a hugely liberating force for me.
I like the format.
Yeah.
All right, so you leave the fashion thing, and I guess it's fair to say that the wine thing, really takes a turn specifically, into wine. So take me in that direction.
Well, I think, one key reason is I was going through a breakup. So, it makes you kind of want to change your life.
Yeah.
But I definitely, there's if you like to express things in a fairly precise way, you're almost a liability when you work in fashion. Because
Why?
when you express things too polite or too precisely, then you've removed any of the mystique that would otherwise allure shoppers or allure consumers.
That's interesting.
So there's a reason why perfume advertisements have no tasting notes with them.
Right.
They're just an image of a beautiful person draped in jewels on a beach somewhere.
It's so true.
It's the mystique. So obviously, any descriptive capacity that I have was completely underexploited in the fashion industry. And so I wanted to do something else. I figured it was kind of high time to change my life. And at that time, I'd become fascinated with the conversation about wine that occurs between vignerons, between winemakers. It's nothing like the consumer-facing American sommelier kind of discourse, or even American wine writer discourse.
But do you feel that way because all those years in Paris, you're now sitting in the wine bars, getting a sense of the scene, and to your point, that's not going on here, or wasn't?
No, it's not that, because honestly, even the kind of wine conversation that happens at wine bars in Paris also bores me at this point.
Oh yeah.
It's quite trite. But I like what happened in Paris is that it's not like in America where you have this 3-tier system in a lot of places where where wine as a subject is mediated by people selling it at all times. You very rarely find yourself sitting and drinking with a winemaker or a vigneron, or someone growing grapes. Very rarely. Whereas in Paris, because it's such it is by and large the cultural capital of France, as well as the literal capital of France. You get all the winemakers coming through, the vignerons coming through, and who will be delivering their own wines to the various bistros, parking illegally and running in with a bunch of cases of wine, and then having a splash of wine with the staff, and then running off to deliver again.
That's cool.
Or I don't know, you just see you meet a lot of vignerons living in Paris, and it was at that point that I realized that the discourse about wine growing, wine making among vignerons was so much more interesting and so much more granular and tactile for me. And so I kind of wanted to be more part of that, more privy to that. And I figured an interesting way to do that would be to move to the Beaujolais.
And why the Beaujolais? That's kind of the birthplace or an important part for the movement, right?
Yes, definitely.
I mean, that's why, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's definitely the cradle of the natural wine movement, if you want to call it like that.
I want a little later into the interview, I want to talk about that. But you go there and you stay there for how long?
About 1.5 years full time, and then I was still going back all the time for another 6 months or so. Kind of 2 years on and off.
And you're living, writing, embedding yourself in the Beaujolais culture, and don't you help making wine? I mean,
initially my project, because I quit the fashion industry job because I thought I could write a book about wine, and my big advice for aspiring writers out there would be to never quit your day job until you have the book deal.
Right.
Because it definitely took me another 4 years to get a book deal.
Sound like a parent now or something.
It was definitely 4 years a bit in the wilderness after I quit my comfortable job in an office in Paris. I thought it'd be interesting to write a book about the wines of the Beaujolais. To be honest, I was quite inspired by a British, I believe, wine writer called Wink Lorch.
Yeah,
who
Wink's
wrote,
still around, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And her book about the Jura region, it's very thorough. It doesn't have any specific natural bent, and nor does she, but it's very thorough, very educational, and really, goes into a granular study of the terroir, of the local culture, and I really thought that would be interesting to do for the Beaujolais. I thought it would be a nice sort of bite-sized project that would then maybe leave me well-positioned to write a different book about natural wine. And in the end, absolutely zero publishers were interested in that Beaujolais book. It was too narrow focus for a large market like America. And in the end, it was thanks to my fantastic agent, Laura Nolan, and she, a couple years down the line, she had learned of someone who was interested in doing a large book about natural wine, and she suggested me for the role.
It's great. So that's how, from Beaujolais to the book.
And of course, the Beaujolais was a very, very key foundation. I think one of the reasons why there aren't more books about natural wine is honestly the Beaujolais genesis of it is a fairly forbidding topic.
But do you have to spend time on that to be honest, to cover the topic?
I think
if that seems preventative in a way, or
I think
hampering.
It depends how what kind of approach you take to the topic. I mean, the first thing that I told the publisher when we were starting this book project was that I don't want this book to be my definition of natural wine. I wanted it to be a really kind of sociological, anthropological approach to natural wine as a cultural movement. It's like if I were writing a book about punk or about hip hop.
So that's a good segue, because, and we and you will take this wherever we want, because, that was a good setup. I mean, I've devoted many episodes, more now than ever, to natural wine, from A to Z, from Alice Firing to Zev Rovine. There's your A to Z, right there. And we've tried, because you have to, on the podcast, define what natural wine is. And I never wanted to put it in that box. Here's what natural wine is and all that. But I have you now. Mm-hmm. So however you want to not define it, but
Can I give you a fairly Mandarin and geeky and obscure definition?
Yeah.
I think for me the best definition of natural wine is Thierry Pouzelat getting into a fist fight with Alain Castex at the funeral of Marcel Lapierre.
All right, so
this is something
know
that
those
happened.
people, and you know them better than me. So let's just talk about the players, describe them, and who they are. It's sort of like some fist fight in New York with famous people, but you know why they were. So
yeah,
Pouzelat, describe who he is.
Well, I think to get into why that's a funny definition of natural wine, you have to talk about Marcel Lapierre first.
Right.
And obviously, I think natural wine has segmented and fragmented in so many ways since his era. He died in 2010, but he began doing his first experiments in sulfite-free vinification in 1978, and he began actually selling a small quantity of wine vinified and bottled without sulfites in around 1984. You hear a lot of different stories about which precise year it was. So despite the fact that the whole natural wine movement has really fragmented and become very, very global since his era, among French winemakers and even among winemakers abroad, everyone acknowledges his central role in promoting this ideology and promoting an awareness, a consciousness of purity and vinification, and making that a criteria, helping return that to being a criterion of good winemaking. So it was his funeral. I wasn't there. I have this story secondhand from a number of sources, and that was in 2010. And Thierry Pouzelat is an acolyte. He was influenced by Marcel Lapierre as well. He's you could call him probably one of the most influential winemakers of the second generation of natural winemakers. He joined his brother Jean-Marie Puzelat at their estate in the Loire-et-Cher, which is about 2 hours and a bit west of Paris, near the town of Blois. And he joined his brother at his estate there in 1994. But before then, he had worked around in various other estates in Burgundy and in Provence. And I believe, as I understand it, and this could be contested as well by several of the participants, but as I understand it, he became connected with the Marcel Lapierre circle at that time, which was already kind of a thriving little underground, through an enologist called Jan Roel, who he met while he Puzelat was working as vineyard manager or cellar master of Domaine de la Tour du Bon in Bondol. And so anyway, Puzelat got into Lapierre circle, fell in love with this notion of naturalness and vinification, because it still wasn't called natural wine at that point. It was still called Vin sans sulfites, which is a bit of a misnomer, but wine without sulfites.
That's how it was referred?
In the early circles in the 1980s and 1990s.
Was that zero sulfur or just very low sulfur?
Often just very low,
Yeah.
but sometimes zero. It really depended on the estate. So that's Thierry Puzelat, who then, of course, he's still a really fantastic, incredible winemaker. Has an estate called Clos de Tuboeuf.
Right.
They do a lot of beautiful estate wines. They also do a lot of negociant wines, where they purchase the grapes. He also works as a wine importer, importing some of the leading lights of Italian and Spanish and Georgian natural wine into France. He's got his fingers in a lot of pies. And then I guess there was a dispute
About?
and it was about Alain Castex's wine, as I understand. Alain Castex is a figure really more from the. I believe he began making wine in, I want to say, 1985 in Corbière at the time, but then he got into natural winemaking later. He worked with his wife Guylaine Magnier in Banyuls, and that was from around the mid-90s at some time. I don't have the exact year off the top of my head. And influenced by people like, I believe, Bernard Balassin, who's a Languedoc vigneron who's still alive as well. He got into natural winemaking as well, and also influenced by people like Lapierre as well. And but he represents a different wing of the natural wine movement these days, more radically opposed to sulfite addition than someone like Puzelat, who will use it if he feels he has to.
Wait, so is my take that he's more extreme than Puzelat?
In that regard, yes.
And was that part of the riff?
Apparently, I'm sure they've patched it over at this point, but
Right.
it was someone had heard someone badmouth their wines in Paris and say that there was some volatility or mouse in the wines, and it literally led to a fist fight at a funeral in the Beaujolais. And this, I think, it's a snapshot of kind of where the natural wine scene is today. This that's kind of the contemporary discourse within the natural wine scene. Is almost no sulfite addition radical enough?
Really?
Yeah, is where the conversation is, I think.
So that's
Or that's one of the key factors in the conversation today.
it's funny, it's not that I'm trying, but I want to be able to explain or define natural wine, and you come back to me with sort of this fight,
really
which is great.
a really obtuse
but I want to throw back to you that
Yeah.
the title of your book is
Yeah.
The
What
World
it
of
is.
Natural Wine. What is it? So
Okay.
that warrants an answer.
We do
Who
have it.
makes it and why it matters. But I think based on how you answer the question, and I read the book, it's not an answer. It's there are many different things that lead to the answer, and
Yeah.
I think that's what's beautiful about the book.
I'm being a little bit coy about that.
No, I
like,
know.
On some level, you can simply say that it is, or at least I think few would disagree with me if I say it's wine made from grapes that were farmed more than organically, which is to say at least organically, but ideally with organics as an entryway, as the beginning of a path towards better farming. So made from grapes farmed in such a way, vinified without additives, transformative enological procedures, and with almost no or zero added sulfites, and with neither fining nor filtration.
Right. That's really the basic.
Yeah, I mean, for me, those are like. One still finds a lot of filtered natural wine, filtered purportedly natural wine. That's sort of a particular bugaboo of my own.
I was going to say, is filtration... I know it's not really natural wine if there's filtration, but there are natural wines that are filtered?
There are many respected natural wine estates who will still filter some of their wines. Are
they using fining, or are they running it through these
filtration? Often with the diatomaceous earth filtration.
Okay.
Yeah, or various cartridge filtration or plate filtration. It's a really nebulous subject, filtration.
To me, we talk about defining natural wine, but to me, and I want to talk to you about this before we get into the book, because there's specifics in the book. You said it in the book, it's not just a beverage, but a culture, and there's an ethical imperative. And that's what's important overall about wine, and I want you to, talk about that a little.
Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned that in the very first, in the little introduction text that I wrote for the book, and that really came from living in a winemaking community in France. You see the ravages, both environmental and in terms of the health of the local populace. The amount, and obviously I won't cite particular cases because it seems a little bit indelicate to use somebody's health condition or some family's tragedy as a way to push natural wine, but the amount of cases of birth disabilities or early onset cancer that you see in winemaking communities in France is astonishing and tragic.
Yeah, people have not talked about that.
Yeah, and
these guys are literally living on it.
Yeah, I mean, I had a friend in the Beaujolais lost his mother and his uncle within the span of 2 or 3 years from each other, both in their early 40s, both to cancer, and that's not normal. It's really just not normal. And this is linked to the use of herbicides. It's linked to the use of synthetic pesticides. I mean, the estates that employ these methods of farming always say that they're doing it because it's an economic imperative for them in order to keep wine cheap for consumers abroad on export markets. And conveniently, these consumers abroad on export markets never need to see these environmental ravages and the ravages to the health of the community. It's a horrible thing to try and raise children, not that I've done this, but raise children where they can't walk on the vines because it's poisonous.
Right. I mean, wasn't there a time before the war people were pretty practical about that, and then it became more industrialized where,
herbicides really, they came into the scene in France in the mid-'70s.
Yeah.
And they were,
it's not...
maybe a little earlier.
It kind of terrorized everything for the last 40 years or something.
Well, it's the point where when we, as recently, for example, in the news, there was some news about the death of the fellow who created Tubac Chuck.
Oh, Francia.
Yeah, and of course there's images of this fellow in his obituaries, and his obituaries were all fairly even-handed, discussions of his career, and you see this guy pictured for press images in his vines, and his vines are like an absolute atrocity, like machine-pruned, monoculture to the horizon.
Well, that's the ultimate in that example, right?
Yeah, and
that's the industrial formulaic turnout.
And you think how many readers of these major news media publications are looking at that viticulture and realizing what an atrocity it is, like what an economic, an ecological, and human health catastrophe it is. We don't twig it. When we look at images of vineyards, you look at every conventional estate on Earth. They're putting beautiful images of their vineyards in their brochures and everything, and nobody
the Napa
twigs.
vineyards are these rolling, trimmed, no cover.
But people don't twig the absence of grass cover. That is unnatural.
What's good
that
is the
bizarre.
opposite of what's shown. It's just crazy.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, everyone should know that. Vines have grass. It's just weird when they don't have grass.
Yeah. All right. We have to take a quick break, and then when we come back, I want to get into the book. So we're talking to Aaron Ayscough. Aaron just wrote his new book, The World of Natural Wine. When we come back, we're going to get specifically into a lot of stuff in the book, stuff that we broached. You're listening to The Grape Nation on the Heritage Radio Network. We'll be right back.
Sprezzatura, an Italian noun that means a studied carelessness. Picture this: woven basket in hand at the farmer's market, shucked oysters, ripe tomatoes, rapini, crusty bread, and a perfectly chilled bottle of pet nat. Cutting lilacs to set the tone. Red lipsticks, friends arrive, table is set. Slow dance under the sun, barefoot on the grass. A cheeky smirk while lighting up a cigarette. Apron comes off, inhibitions do as well. Hello friends at Grape Nation. I am Mariana Velasquez, author of Colombiana the Cookbook, and I created a line of hosting wear, Casa Velasquez, as an extension of my life, inviting you to fully embrace your imperfect, unbridled self. Come with me to casavelasquez.co and reimagine your hosting essentials so we can set the tone for your table and home. Casa Velasquez is a mutual supporter of Heritage Radio Network.
Will climate change alter the beer and wine we drink? Come find out at Fern Talks and Eats in Brooklyn the evening of October 24th. The event will include a panel discussion with leading writers and makers, including wine writer Alice Fearing, Garrett Oliver, head brewer at Brooklyn Brewery, and science and nature writer Rowan Jacobson. Come taste the future with a special selection of beers and wines. More information and tickets are available at thefern.org. This episode is supported by HRN Business member, the Food and Environment Reporting Network.
Okay, we're back. We're back with my guest, Aaron Ayscough. Aaron, let's talk about the book, and we can get deeper into some of the things that, we've already talked about. I want to talk a little more about farming and all that. But I just want to say, I read the book. I read it, and then I used it as a reference guide when I put the interview together. And I think it's brilliant.
Thank you.
I think it's rich. I think it's deep.
Thanks.
It's informative. And it's incredibly thorough. When you talk about getting into a topic, it's like, gee, I was left without this or that. You broach other wine regions and you do it well, but we'll talk about why, you approached it the way you did. Just quickly, I always have to get the vitals out of the way. So what prompted you to write the book? I mean, like you'd been on the ground in Beaujolais, you'd worked in wine.
It was that the publisher wanted a book.
So it was really like, hey, why don't you?
I mean, this wouldn't. I would
and
never.
You write and you love to write.
Yeah,
so.
but I never would have elected myself to try and tackle the entire subject of natural wine. That's why, like I said, I think I touched on it earlier. But when they asked me to write a book about all natural wine, I was like, well, look, here are the ways that could possibly be achievable. And I said, we have to focus on it as a cultural movement. We have to talk about really the 1980s, the 1990s, the 2000s.
When you say a cultural movement, are they like, well, what do you mean? We just want you to write a book about wine.
It was a little bit like that, yes.
There was some of that?
Yeah. I think in America, it's been kind of confused as sort of a simple lifestyle choice, or something. And it is to some extent. There's an ethic and an aesthetic in natural wine, but it's not like a wellness thing, which is really a huge miscommunication about it in America.
When did all that hit? When you spoke to the publisher about writing a book, was that 3, 4, 5 years ago?
That was in 2019, January 2019,
okay.
that we signed the book deal.
And you buy in pretty quickly, and you start putting together the idea of the book.
Yeah, well, actually, I'd put together the pitch before then, because signing the actual contract is later on in the process, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
How long did it take you to write it?
Really, it's included. There's some of those pictures in there that I took back in 2013.
So there was stuff that's just part of.
Yeah, that's because
your life's movement.
Yeah, but really, I've been trying to work on a wine book since 2015. A lot of the material that I've been kind of putting together for what was intended as a Beaujolais book that found its way into this book about natural wine as a whole. And yeah, but really in terms of officially working on this exclusively, that's been since 2019.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the book now, not what you did to write it, but is this the type of book that will warrant, in a good way, say 3, 5, 7 years from now, an update?
I certainly hope so.
Because this is an ever-moving...
I mean, there's even errors that we're going to correct in the second printing of this one.
Yeah, but that goes without saying. But I mean,
any
the
book this
world is
big.
so exciting that it's going to require...
Yeah, I mean, if there's a demand for it, I'd be happy to update it. I mean, there were already many estates that I would have liked to have included in the book that, due to page limits, I wasn't able to.
Right.
Yeah, and so that was a whole politically
Right.
touchy thing to figure out as well.
There's basically 3 parts of the book. I mean, you open the book with a section on how to think about wine, how the grapes are grown, and how natural wine is made.
Yes.
I think the bigger picture for natural wine is that it's not just good for our palate, but for the planet. And we broach the farming thing, but I guess, and I want to re-emphasize how important farming and farming practices are in natural wine and in the world, and why isn't everybody doing that?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think why wine is a great entry point to talking about farming is that it's a subject that often is seen as frivolous. It's not a basic human need. It's not, food, clothing, or shelter. It's wine. We don't actually need it to live as much as many, vignerons might want to convince you otherwise. But and so if we are gonna enjoy it, drink it, make it part of our lives, then like the first criteria should be that it doesn't kill the planet. That it's not vastly harmful to rural communities.
Is covered well enough in other areas, in food, organic
Not
food?
at all. I mean,
no, I think there's more of a passion
One
here
of-
in wine.
I think much. Well, it's passion in wine because at least it's grapes and then wine happen to be a product that is intimately reflective of the circumstances of its production. Whereas it's a little harder for us to taste a turnip and know whether it's an organic turnip or a chemically farmed turnip.
Right.
But turnips are just as important, on some level.
Well, yeah.
I mean, there's almost like a market and media reality why we're not talking about the necessity of restaurants to work with exclusively organic or more than organic produce, because it's nearly impossible for them to exist, in our current economy while working with exclusively organic or more than organic produce.
Is that's an economic thing or availability or?
I mean, probably a little of both, but
Yeah.
how few restaurants market themselves that way? Almost none.
Well,
And
many did
there's a
years ago,
reason.
farm to table, and on the back of the menu they'd give you their suppliers.
Which is
People
great. I'm
still
all
do
for
that,
that.
but
Yeah.
it is a very small amount in that sense.
And is it everything, or is it just their proteins that they're giving you their sourcing from? Where's the celery coming from?
Yeah. So the book, it certainly helped me, and it very skillfully talks about natural wine. And natural wine we talked about as a big box, but you were able to, drill it down a little. There's organic wine, there's biodynamic wine, and then really the third category is natural wine. And just because a wine is organic or necessarily biodynamic doesn't mean it's...
Not at all.
Explain that to me a little. People are like, okay, this is good, it's organic.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely deal with that, at a reasonable length in the beginning of the book. And to kind of summarize it here, it's that the organics, you have to really look at them as separate cultural movements as well. I'd say the thing is, I guess to say it in the most simple, nutshell kind of way, you can walk to the supermarket at the end of the road or whatever, and buy an organic, sometimes even a biodynamic wine, and these still will not be natural wines. Because
right, that's my point.
The organics and biodynamics are systems of farming, and neither of them are really rigorous enough within themselves.
When you say to farming, is it exclusive to farming? Organics and
biodynamics. Yeah, both organics and biodynamics. They do also have
emphasize cellar
They
practices.
do put some limitations on cellar practices, but limitations that are nowhere near rigorous enough.
So give me an example, because it's laid out well in the book. how, let's take farming practices organically, biodynamically, and natural. You're not doing certain things naturally that are being done, or you shouldn't be.
Well, no, I mean, that's when you talk about just farming. I mean, natural is not a certification. It's important to make that really clear.
No, I know.
Yeah, it's like it's a self-policing subculture within the wine world, and there are many natural estates that decline
certification.
Yeah, certification.
But proper practice.
Exactly. Yeah. And on that level, it does require a certain level of trust in the estate. And I think that the only thing really encouraging that trust is the fact that natural wine is this small self-policing subculture. Vignerons who find themselves abusing that trust with their peers find themselves slowly sidelined within that community.
That's it, though. I mean, the vignerons care and are involved in their self-policing. I mean, that's the difference.
Ideally, yes.
Yeah, I mean, not exclusively, but ideally. I mean, that's an important thing.
I think there's this continual conversation in the wine media about saying that consumers on the mass market need to be able to trust natural wine estates, so natural wine must be codified and certified. And I think that's based on a certain misunderstanding of the scalability of natural wine.
How?
In the sense that great natural wine estates, no one is having difficulty selling their wine. It's all already sold.
I know. To the point where you can't get it.
To the point where they don't need to. They really don't.
Prices have gone up.
They really don't need to make themselves more available to an ever larger mass market. It mistakes oftentimes many of these estates' own personal ambitions with growth. They simply are not interested in that. Not interested in raising their price due to demand. Not interested in any of these things. And yet we still have a lot of wizened voices in the conventional wine media saying, well, how does Joe Schmo understand this, and how will he trust you guys, and how will he trust natural wine estates? And the answer is, it doesn't matter.
Right. Yeah. It's all right. That's an interesting point. Let's move along in the book, because I really think. I said this to you off air too. I'm intimidated by how much information is in the book. And after doing so many podcasts, it's like, how do you broach all these things? And, my way out is just go out and buy the book. Hopefully, this will point you in that direction. But there's a section in the book called The Pantheon of Natural Wine. That's where you discuss the wine regions, Loire, Beaujolais, Champagne, and all that. Explain why the book, and there's a reason, is predominantly focuses, on France. Yeah. And there's a singular importance, and we broached it a little about Beaujolais.
Yeah. It's again, it was about taking a really cultural, sociological sort of approach to natural wine, and how it came to be, why we began talking about natural wine. If you want to talk about that story, it's a story that begins in the Beaujolais with people like Marcel Lapierre, Jacques Néauport, Jules Chauvet, who are all discussed at length in the book. They found an audience among a group of eccentrics in Paris in the 1980s, notably François Morel, Bernard Pontonnier, and various others.
These were wine bar owners, retailers?
These were wine bar owners who then,
They were the conduit.
They were the initial kind of enthusiasts for this idea of winemaking without sulfites, which was very novel at that time, because no one believed it could be done, basically. It was winemaking had already come to rely to such an extent on sulfite addition that no one ever tried to do it without it, or to try to nearly eliminate it. And so they began really supporting these winemakers. And then Paris, the thing about Paris is that today it is still the world's most visited city. It's a huge window to the world. And so there were there were three distinct waves of early natural wine establishments in Paris, beginning in the 1980s, going into the 2000s. And now obviously there's still a bazillion today. It's really it's a very, very developed market for natural wine. And that it was this visibility in Paris that led to it becoming a big thing in Tokyo, in Copenhagen, in San Francisco, in Oakland, and New York. And,
Yeah, that's exciting. I mean, talk about Tokyo. I mean, Copenhagen with Noma and all that's been going on for a while. But it's nice.
They were
to see
very early
places.
early adopters of the aesthetic.
I think there's 13 sections on all the regions, and then the last section, which may be the 14th, you call it Europe and the Caucasus,
It's a bit, yeah.
Which to me, I'm glad you did that. And when we talk about maybe doing, an updated version, maybe that opens up more. But correct me if I'm wrong, some of the most exciting things happening are in that Europe and Caucasus thing, like Austria and Spain all over. Talk to me outside of France about, some notable things.
No, of course. I mean, I'm the first to tell everybody I speak to that I find those sections of the book to be embarrassingly cursory and superficial. They really just give it a very bird's eye kind of overview of what has happened since the development of this thriving natural wine community in France. I mean, my cutoff for estates, for including them as like kind of full page listings in that kind of pantheon of natural wine, was I was trying to make that around 2007, 2008. I think the youngest estate that I have in the profile there, I think is like Rupert Leroy in Champagne, who began in 2010, around there, where they've got a full page profile. And then if we want to talk about the natural wine cultures that have arisen in Catalonia, in Georgia, in
Styria?
Yeah, in Styria, and in all these places, they've really coalesced into their present kind of natural wine identified scenes after what happened in France. So really, I was trying to take a fairly dispassionate, cold, chronological approach to this. And that's my justification for giving such short shrift to so many scintillatingly nuanced and beautiful wine cultures that exist outside of France.
It's funny you say short shrift, because that's a little hard. But the coverage isn't as extensive as some of the other things. But some of these areas and winemakers are as jamming as anyone else.
Absolutely.
Anywhere.
I would love for someone to pay me to write a similar book on just Italy. That'd be incredible. I would adore
Italy,
that.
I think after France very much embraced the natural wine movement.
Yeah, and
so let me ask you a sterile question, because I think this is important and it's cool. You basically, when you talk about all the regions, whether it's Jura or the Loire or Beaujolais and all that, you basically adhere to a format. Like in each section, it's kind of cool that the same information is disseminated. There's dining recommendations, there's history and all that. Just talk me through, when you talk about each region, that you make sure, extensive coverage of the winemakers.
Yeah, I think I was really trying to keep the book really about natural wine and not to have to make it like an almanac of all French wine regions. And so that's why in the beginning of each chapter I try to talk about each region's particular history and relationship with this notion of natural wine, because it's important, I think, often within kind of America and mass media wine discourse, we tend to just people generalize about French wine or generalize about Italian wine, but really, like, that's an absurd notion. Each of these regions has a vast and long and varied winemaking history that is quite peculiar and unique to itself. You really have to talk about regions as if they're their own nations, and sometimes even sub-regions of regions as if they're their own nations. The wine culture of Bordeaux has literally nothing in common with the wine cultures of any other region of France. It's organized completely differently. It's very strange, and it's due to the fact that was once part of England. So it's important to remember, with these kind of countries, that their unification, as nation states, is relatively late. It definitely post-dates their long winemaking history. So that's why I talk about their unique winemaking histories of each, or natural, or their unique histories within natural wine, and then I talk about the wines to know, which is kind of just a couple famous natural wine bottles from those regions.
Section with literally specific bottle pictures and recommendations.
I wanted that list to be like
that, and believe me, people love that.
I mean, I guess the idea is that at the end, if even if you know nothing about natural wine, I was hoping that people would be able to pick this book up and then not sound like idiots when they talk about natural wine afterwards.
I think you've accomplished that.
That's the.
You talk about tasting destinations, like I said, dining, recos. And I think one of the cool things is you do a thing called Legends in the Making. So you have a wine region that's established with great winemakers, but either it's a generational thing or a new guy is coming and making wine and making some noise, and you make note of that.
The Legends in the Making section at the end of each chapter, that was kind of a way for me to talk about younger estates that some of them are already legends. Like Julie.
Give me an example.
Julie Balligny in the Beaujolais. She should have gotten her own page because her winemaking history goes back much further than the creation of her estate in the Beaujolais. She used to be the winemaker at Terre des Chardons near Nîmes, I believe, but she only created her estate in the Beaujolais in like 2009, so that seemed to be sort of after the cutoff. So then I didn't include a full page, and I kind of regretted that in the end. Julie was a huge help to me as well. She helped me find a place to stay when I moved to the Beaujolais in 2015.
Oh, nice.
So she's a friend and an inspiration.
Bit of an emotional attachment.
And so those legends in the making sections, I really use those to really shine a light on younger estates that were my friends. A lot of them.
Very cool.
And
We talked about this a little earlier, but I want to, kind of tighten up the question. The role that importers, wine bar owners, retailers, sommeliers, I think they've been the movers and the cheerleaders for natural wine, and without that sort of cadre of people. I mean, do you agree? I mean,
absolutely.
You talked about early Paris, bringing in the.
Initially, those were intended to be much larger sections in the book, so the third portion of this book it discusses how to find natural wine, how to taste natural wine, how to et cetera, et cetera. And so initially, I was planning to really devote long areas to profiles of prominent sommeliers and prominent importers and I soon realized that was going to be impossible because it would end up taking up like as much space as the entire section devoted to.
Yeah, I'm okay
estates.
with that,
yeah.
And I realized that
and
there's
also,
that many
it would have
people.
gotten super political as well. It was going to be.
But categorically, they're very influential.
Absolutely, people like Eric Nariot of Cave de Pirène in London, who also with his wife Anna Martins does Vino di Anna in Sicily. His career really traces the formation of the natural wine scene and movement. He was one of the first importers of Pierre Auvernois, and who's a famous Jura winemaker. And really, he's been incredibly inspiring and intelligent.
What's
wine
ironic
genius
is
for me.
we're at Frenchette and we're with our friend Jorge. And when you talk about the New York natural wine scene, it's not that old. It's not a... And Jorge dates back to the beginning with 360 and Balthazar when, I forgot his name, was it Nossiter, who went on to make Mondovino and all that. I mean, it all progressed, and, here's a guy, and we're at Frenchette 5 years ago. This was the first all-natural wine list, which doesn't sound like a big deal, but...
Yeah, no, it takes a lot of will and force and charm, I think, to be able to surmount people's
champagne,
people's prejudices and about natural wine. And honestly, it's all a question. There's a beautiful word that Dominique Durand used to me once in French, and about talking about people's experience with wine and their openness towards natural wine. And he was saying it's always a question of paramétrage, so your parameters basically, and how you adjust them, and how they happen to be set. It really is your paramétrage when you're tasting wine is your previous wine experience. And I think we're at a time in mass culture where several generations have gone by, without people tasting even an unfiltered wine. And
so that leads into my next question. I think wine drinkers, mainstream wine drinkers, are accustomed to drinking traditional wines.
Well,
that's
traditional
what they know.
is a word I don't like to use with regard to conventional
whatever
wines.
the other stuff is,
Yeah.
I mean, there's incredibly discernible differences.
Absolutely. Well,
You know,
I mean, you look at what
you talk about that
What
in
is
the
the goal?
book.
What is the goal of a conventional enologist? And that is to make a wine estate profitable and economically sustainable.
But he does that by making the wine the same
commodifying
thing.
the heck out of the
right,
wine.
so
Yeah.
that the beauty of wine is the difference in the vintage,
that
how the
it's not
climate
Coca-Cola.
affects. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean the other way is we're
Yeah.
not going to name specific wines, but they just taste the same. They're always deep dark
But,
purple.
and everyone always says, oh, well, you know, you're spending so much money on a bottle of wine, you want it to be a consistent experience. But that's just not what agricultural products are. And wine is, first and foremost, you know, it's not a futures commodity, it's an agricultural product.
But I always worry, and I think as time has passed by, it's not as bad. But I worry that people who stray into natural wines for the right reason, there's an inconsistency, there's a funkiness, there's a mousiness, there's a cloudiness, you know, which could be off-putting. And those are the trademarks, you know, of natural wine.
But that's
you
it.
know, so how do you taste natural wine? I mean,
And, well, it's about adjusting one's parametrage. I think
it's that.
so much of the way we taste wine posits this moment of tasting between the consumer and the wine glass as being like the be all and the end all. This point of judgment, where the work of the farmer, the winemaker, everything is being judged by the consumer, and leads to that moment. And I think that's a terribly outdated and sad way of tasting and assessing wine. Really, it's like we should consider ourselves, from my perspective, I think we should consider ourselves students of the winemakers and of the vignerons,
Right.
and of these pre-existing wine cultures that
Well, the
predate
story
that
part and all
predate
that.
our own preferences.
Yeah.
So I mean, that in my own kind of journey learning about wine, I've always tried to learn from vignerons and really get as close to the source as possible. That's what I do on the Substack that I write, the Not Drinking Poison thing. That's where all the where I end up putting a lot of the kind of primary source documents.
So let's talk about Not Drinking Poison.
Yeah.
It's an active writing opportunity for you. I mean, are you writing on a regular basis? Do you disappear and then come back, or you
I try every 2 weeks to 3 weeks. I try to
so we
put
can
something on there.
expect
Yeah.
a couple times a month type thing.
Yeah, once or twice a month. Mostly because I'm basically breaking all of the rules of this platform, because this platform is always encouraging us to.
Substack, which is very liberal, you're breaking even those rules.
You know, they're always saying, like, you know, you should check in with your readers like twice a week, and I think that's horrible. I would hate to receive emails from somebody I don't personally know even more than once a week is irritating. Even once a week is a little much. You know, as important as wine is, it's not that important that you need to hear about it from the same person twice a week, I feel. So basically, I try not to flood people's inboxes with my newsletter.
Are you lying in bed saying, I got to write about this? Or, I mean, do you have like a list of things that you're trying to get to?
Definitely. I don't have enough time to deal with it all. There's so much beautiful subjects out there, and there's.
Okay.
I mean,
So why wouldn't you write
I never
3-4
lack
times a
for
month then?
something to say.
Why wouldn't you write more?
Because I'm here with you, Sam.
Okay. Well, let's disclaim that. You
Yeah.
just wrote a book, which took a lot of your time.
It's 440 pages, Sam.
You're in the States promoting it. And I must admit, and kudos to you, you're on an extensive promotional tour. So just tell me, Not Drinking Poison, what's the best way to jump onto that?
Just do a Google search for me or for Not Drinking Poison, and it should be one of the first two results. And it's on the Substack platform. I made it as cheap as possible. The Substack platform makes you ask for if you do paid
Oh, really?
subscriptions, which I do.
So to you, it's more about hitting the minimum low and getting people in.
Well, I wanted it to.
not like
I
a
don't think this should
Patreon.
be completely Mandarin knowledge. What a real wine is, and you know, and what I try to express on this with this newsletter. And as I was saying, the newsletter is where I put a lot of interviews with winemakers. I really, it's my favorite format these days, because I go there and I do an interview like we're doing now. Only I don't put it on a podcast. I transcribe it,
Right.
And I translate it to English.
What's the current story? Can you remember?
Oh gosh.
I looked, I forgot.
Yeah, me too. I forget.
Well, even better motivation
I've
for
been
people
writing
to
a lot
check it out.
about Burgundy recently, because there's a lot of really there's a beautiful and very dynamic and welcoming scene of young natural winemakers in Burgundy these days.
Yeah,
And,
when people think of Burgundy, they think of it a certain
don't think
way.
of welcoming.
But when you think of it, you know, from the natural wine perspective, there's a lot of exciting things going on. All right, Aaron, we've been at this almost an hour. I told you it'd go quickly. I want you to do a thing that we call the wine list, where we ask our guests preferences. It's very spontaneous. Don't dwell on it. 5 questions. We ask everyone the same 5 questions. Here's the first question.
Okay.
What are you drinking now? Not like this second, but like what, like as the seasons change or when you travel, you drink differently than at home. What's in your fridge? You know, what are you doing for research?
I really love this this Czech birch sap.
Czech from Czechoslovakia.
And it's not wine.
Spell it.
It's a birch sap. So the birch tree.
Is it like
February
a
or March?
birch beer soda?
You can pierce them, and you get the sap. And there's a friend called Jan Klimesh. He's based in the Czech countryside near a lot of birch forests, and he hit upon this recipe of lacto-fermenting birch sap. So it's a way to preserve it without filtration or using additives.
Do you add anything to it, or do you just drink the lacto-fermented
He does
birch?
various infusions with it. He also makes some that are just the birch sap lacto-fermented. And because you wait, after 4 months, it lacto-ferments, and it's a beautiful non-alcoholic drink with a light sparkle and no sugar.
Nobody has ever given me that answer, and you had to figure it out.
I love it. I've been making some myself these days as well. It's delicious.
You're a birch sapper. So give me something a little more traditional.
Okay. If it has to be alcoholic.
I'm twisting your arm. You can't see it.
Let's see. What do I mean, gosh. In terms of wines that I've kind of come back to often.
Is there a region or a producer? I mean, are you focusing on anything?
I love my friends at Clos Fontaine in the Languedoc.
Right, you worked with them.
Yeah, for the second year in a row, I've done harvest and a little bit of vinification work with them, and they also encouraged me to make some wine last year, which I'm doing on a very non-professional kind of hobbyist basis, but I absolutely adore their wines.
Okay, so Clos Fontaine.
Yeah.
So the birch sap and Clos Fontaine. I'll take those.
Yeah.
All right, second question. Fun question, goofy question. Favorite wine and food pairing? Not something you eat every night or every month, but is there something that when it's there, it's like, ooh, ah?
I don't know. I usually...
The way you're reacting, it's not something... It doesn't seem like something...
I usually find myself getting into rants against food pairing whenever anyone mentions food pairing, just because I find it's a very... It's sort of this discourse that comes from our overabundance of choices in cuisine, which is just a feature of, of this late capitalist stage of mass transport everywhere, eating guavas in midwinter and God knows where, in Alaska,
right. Watermelon's a summer fruit, exactly. But we'll grow it in like Patagonia.
And we're wondering what will go with it in the, if we're having like a sushi burrito or something, what goes with that? I don't know. Nothing goes with that.
So the answer is no answer.
No. I mean, okay, in terms of,
I'm okay with that. No, you.
No, like for example, like if I ever eat a roast chicken, I love like some good Beaujolais with that. Some good Cru Beaujolais, some Fleury, some Morgon,
with almost anything.
With some roast. Actually, funnily enough, in the region itself, it's always pork this, pork that, constant pork, and I love pork as well, as much as the next guy.
Wait, so Beaujolais is a lot of
within the region.
Right.
It's just like they say, lard is the favorite vegetable, really, and pork is it's just constant pork in the Beaujolais. But really, I find that those wines, for me, they taste better with a roast chicken. But it is what it is. So.
All right. Third question. These are tough questions for you. I mean, it's different for you. I ask everyone favorite wine restaurant and or bar, and I ask that not like to pick your favorite or leave stuff out, but I ask you just to throw out a few places where the list is great, the vibe is great, the people are great, their knowledge is great, and I think the book kind of answers that question 2-3 times over.
Oh, no, I mean...
But when I ask you personally, I mean, is there a place you find yourself at?
These days, the restaurant Le Soleil in Savigny-les-Beaunes, so near Beaune in Burgundy.
Wait, what's the name of it?
It's called Le Soleil, which means the sun.
Oh, Le Soleil, yeah. A couple other people on the show have mentioned that.
And it's a beautiful, beautiful restaurant. And my friends Leila Auba and Svante Forstorp are in the kitchen there these days. And they do a very radical thing in the kitchen where they try to eliminate the use of plastic in the kitchen, which is an extremely radical thing, and it changes all of their gestures. They also, as a political thing, they don't work with a dishwasher. They wash all their own dishes during and throughout service, and that also changes their gestures and how they create their dishes.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's very revolutionary. I think what they're doing from
that's a good one.
Yeah.
Somebody had mentioned that in the past.
And Lola, the owner, is such a wonderful, wonderful personality.
That's a good one. All right, we'll leave it at that. All right, so here's the fourth question. The fourth question is Aaron Ayscough's favorite all-time wine. And
All-time wine?
now, when I initially structured the question, when I started doing the show, I wanted to find out, guys like you, like, what's the rarest, coolest, most expensive wine you ever drank? I've morphed away from the question. I'm more interested in what's the wine that was important to you, either a gateway, changed the way you thought about it, open your eyes, just a significant wine in your journeys to this day. It can be more than one, but...
Yeah, definitely. Yvon Metras is a winemaker in Fleury in the Beaujolais, and his Fleury Vieille Vigne from the year 2000, I tasted it in 2013 over dinner at a restaurant called Le Pot d'Étain near Chablis.
What was the name of the restaurant?
Le Pot d'Étain. And that was just absolutely singing. It was a moving, beautiful, extremely like rose-scented, gorgeous Fleury. I mean, there's a for me. Everyone always lumps the wines of the Beaujolais in with Burgundy on wine lists just habitually, but I really feel that the region has so much more kinship with the Northern Rhone, and I think Yvon Metras' Fleury in a beautiful vintages. You really see that it has a real. It's like there's some kind of like underground, like link with Saint Joseph, with like the Santa Pine from Hervé
That's
Suot
interesting.
has like a can have a similar profile.
Because those are two of my favorite regions, the Northern Rhone and
particularly Green Midi, where
am I
Yvon's.
wrong in saying this? And I shouldn't even bring it up, but it's hard to get Metras and it's expensive.
Yes, yeah.
And
even in France,
it
it's become hard
upsets
to get
me.
his stuff. But what can you do? I mean,
But we talked about it earlier, how it's things.
yeah. Really, if I were being very conscientious, I should have referred to a wine that is not famous yet.
So can you think of one?
Oh, ones that have moved me hugely? Absolutely, yeah.
Give me. Let's balance it with one of those.
I mean, another one from, let's say, I've already mentioned Clos Fontaine. I probably shouldn't mention them again.
Well, we may mention them in the next sentence, but I'm not sure. But go ahead.
The Cuvée Plan B from Liliane Baucher. That's also not a very large production wine, but I think and it's also from the Beaujolais, coincidentally. But it's made from Muscaris and Sauvignon Gris. It's made from hybrid white wines that are planted in kind of this sort of low-lying, sandy bit of Lancier, which is a Beaujolais village adjacent to Fleury, but it's not considered to be particularly noble or interesting terroir.
Wow.
This wine, I think, is extremely important because it should change the region. The Beaujolais, it's very, very, it's nearly impossible to make excellent white wines with nice acidity in that region. It just doesn't happen. The Chardonnay is what they say in French, mou. It's flabby and it's it's kind of candied
That's
and
a good
lame.
one.
And you taste this. France has very much yet to embrace hybrid grape varieties, which are Vitis vinifera crossed with American grapevine material to produce vines that require less or zero treatments against mildew and oidium, to give you the long explanation. But that is for our listeners. And but this one from Liliane Baucher is absolutely beautiful. There's a really well-judged inclusion of lees in the winemaking process. It's textural, it's beautiful, it has a nice acidity, it's agile. And that's for me, that's a white wine that should change the region. Everyone should rip up the Chardonnay.
Yeah, I hope to see that.
And,
I'm glad you brought it up and pointed out and talked to us a little about
plant
it.
some hybrids there.
All right, here's the last question, and I think you should be able to help me with this. I'm sitting down with everybody in wine from every walk of life, and I'm always kind of looking for, recommend to me the best wine, 15, 20, 22 bucks, a red and a white. And here's the setup. My kids are in their 20s. They can't bring to a party or give a gift of crappy $11 industrial supermarket wine, but they don't have 40, 50 bucks. Mm-hmm. So is there anything you could think of about that? Like, I always thought Muscadet is a pretty good value for that. What do you think?
I like Marc Penot's Muscadet. But he's no longer within the Muscadet appellation. He was kicked out.
Oh, he was?
Yeah.
Can you think of anything
the Muscadet appellation, just to kick it in the pants a little bit. The Muscadet appellation is a disaster. It has like a minimum yield requirement, which is completely demented. Like they will come down on a winemaker for doing too low yields, which
Really?
is generally that's how you get a qualitative winemaking is you do a little lower yields. You don't try and make everything. And
That's crazy.
It's all. I mean, it's just
So can you think of anything?
nearly unanimously filtered and mallow blocked Muscadet. It's like
Jesus, I opened up a can of worms.
Yeah, yeah, and, like quite high sulfite levels.
We
there.
could do a show on that.
Major high sulfite levels as
What
well.
about like
yeah.
Vino Verde or something? I mean, give me.
It's probably also pretty filtered mallow blocked as well. Much of that stuff. But,
So Aaron, you have to tell me some good value.
Well, but the thing is, I always try to say, like, one of the big messages, that the natural wine movement pushes, throughout, is that appellations, unfortunately, are not a very good guarantor guarantee of value or of quality or even of style.
So forget appellation then.
So forget appellations, forget entire regions. It's really about the name of the winemaker. And I figure, I often fall back on the metaphor, like, even if you're not a major film buff, you can probably remember the name of a director who makes some films you like.
Right.
Like whether it's Almodovar or whatever, Fellini, or could be anybody. So, but and I don't think that's too Mandarin to ask people to like just imagine the winemaker as if he's a director or he or she, and try and remember their name. And there are some winemakers that consistently produce absolutely beautiful value,
Give me
well
a
valued
couple
wines.
of names.
Jeff Couteloup, for example, Jean-François Couteloup. He's based north of the town of Béziers in the Languedoc, and his wines are criminally underpriced, if you ask me.
All right, that's why I asked these questions.
And he's a lovely man, an incredible guy.
Give me one other.
Marc Penot, the guy we were just talking about, who's in the Muscadet appellation, but he's not Muscadet. His wines are an extraordinary value, and they age forever.
Really?
Yeah, I've had a lot of old wines from him, and these are wines that like you can buy at a wine shop in Paris at least for like $14 or 14 euros.
Wow.
And I've had some dating back 10 years, 10, 12 years, and they're beautiful. They're ageless. They're pretty amazing.
So I didn't mention this, but we promote the show on social media, and I do Aaron's wine list because people listen every week. And they want to get some, intel or suggestions, from you. So we post the wine list. All right. We have to wrap up the show.
Okay.
But before we do that, we do a segment called the Weekly Wine Tasting. And we're not going to get into it. But I think in front of us, Jorge poured us a Laurent Saillard. Is it Saillard? Does that sound right?
You think this is Saillard?
I think it's a Saillard. Jorge.
I don't know if it's Saillard.
Is this the Saillard?
I don't know if it is. I don't think it is.
Tell me what we're drinking.
To me, it tastes a little more like I would hazard a guess. Maybe.
So this is our weekly wine sip. So Jorge, what are we drinking?
It tastes.
Wait, should we have Aaron try to guess what it is?
I'm perfectly happy getting it wrong live.
I suck at this. Go ahead.
My first guess. My first instinct was kind of tending towards like a Jurassian Pinot of some kind, but then the length wasn't quite that. I ended up kind of gravitating. It tastes a little bit like the work of Pierre André in Lorraine, but he of course sources grapes elsewhere. But those would be my first kind of instincts. Yeah.
I have no idea. I pick up pick up a nice saline quality, and I pick up. All right. All right, so while he's doing that, we'll tell everyone what we're drinking. Where can people buy the book? I asked that question because I don't always say go to Amazon. Where?
Of course, yeah. I only found out recently that someone told me that Amazon owns Book Depository. Because I've been telling people to go to Amazon or Book Depository, and now I realized I was giving like a false choice. Anyway, but In the USA, I believe it's pretty much wherever books are sold. You can get it.
So go to support your small bookseller, your local bookseller.
Everyone's got it or has access to it.
When people come out, they can go to Not Drinking Poison and see your appearances, right? You'll be selling books?
Yes, at all the appearances. We'll be going to a lot of different cities.
So there's that.
You're very familiar.
So we have a reveal. You have it covered up here. Go ahead.
Oh, no shit. Wow.
Wait.
21. Nice. Wow.
Who is it, Jorge?
It is a Petit Max. Yeah. I can't believe I didn't get that.
Kermit Lynch wine, too.
I can't believe it. This is
awesome.
This is the caviar of Primeros. It's the caviar of Beaujolais Nouveau. Oh, but no, this is not the Merlot. This is his Beaujolais Village. Yeah, exactly.
When you say caviar of Beaujolais Nouveau, why do you say that? 'Cause
Well, he makes the best one every year. His Cuvée Fonchon. But this is Mary Lou. Both of these cuvées are named after his daughters. Mary Lou is his eldest daughter.
All right, so I'm going to post a picture of the wine
Beautiful.
so that people know
I can't
about
believe
it. So, and I'm guessing because it's Kermit Lynch, you can get it. It's distributed, right?
Yeah.
It's sold out.
Of course.
We were talking about that. We're talking about the whole natural wine movement. You can't get shit.
But hey, the 2022 Primeur is about to come out, at least in France.
All right, so everyone's on their own on that. All right, Aaron, we have to wrap up. Let me just do a quick show wrap up, and I want to get some other information. So if you have a question, suggestion, wine happening, or event, hit me up at sam@thegrapenation.com. That's sam@thegrapenation.com. Subscribe to the Grape Nation podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you get your pods. If you like the podcast, leave a good review. Follow us on Instagram at @SBenRuby, on Twitter @BenRuby. I know that's confusing, but you can always reach us through the hashtag The Grape Nation. On Facebook, we're at The Grape Nation. As I mentioned, we will post Aaron's wine list answers. There's some interesting stuff there. I may have to email him to get me some spelling or some clarifications on names. I will also post the wine we had for the weekly wine sip on our media sites. So Aaron, support your local bookseller to buy the book. Come out and see you, and you can buy a book. You'll sign it for people. If you're in the middle of nowhere, you're lazy, you can go on Amazon. If we want to, we talked about your Substack newsletter. If we want to follow you on social media, where do we go?
I'm on all of them. I'm on,
Under what?
My Instagram handle is my name, Aaron Ayscough.
Okay, so it's...
Or there's a Not Drinking Poison Instagram.
Is it at AARONAYSCOUH?
COUGH.
COUGH. I meant that. I just didn't say it. So that's where you can find Aaron. You can follow him. And it's a very exciting time for Aaron. The book is terrific. I mean that sincerely. It's definitely a reference for me, and it's very enjoyable. And I think it's a book a lot of us have been waiting for. So thank you for doing the podcast.
Thank you for having me on.
Thank you for writing the book. And here's a little secret. And Aaron, correct me if I'm wrong. It's the first podcast you ever did?
This is my first podcast.
You
We've just
did
popped
good.
my podcast
You
cherry.
did good.
Yeah.
Okay, you did good.
Yeah.
All right, thank you to our guest, Aaron. Thanks to our engineers at the Heritage Radio. Thank you to everyone at Heritage Radio. I'm Sam Ben-Ruby, and you've been listening to The Grape Nation. The Grape Nation is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org/subscribe.